Good morning and welcome to today's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those who are not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after this meeting. We've received apologies from Mr. Gillard today, and I welcome Mr. King, who's attending as his substitute, which brings us on to the first item, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of September 2024. I move that these are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, item 2 is question time. I've not been advised of any questions from the public. So item 3, questions asked by members under standing order number 7. I've not received any such questions. Item 4. Urgent items. We have no urgent items. So next we have item 5, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest they wish to declare? No. Okay. Item 6, declarations of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? No. Item 7, I've not received any petitions. This therefore moves us on to item 8, the first substantive item, which is the Leicestershire County Council Community Safety Annual Update, which is on pages 11 to 22 of your paperwork today. Sharon, I think, is on her way to the meeting, the Assistant Director of Children and Families Services, and we've also got Gurjit here. Morning, Gurjit. Gurjit Samra-Ray, who's the Community Safety Manager. And Mrs. Taylor is online, I think, as well, the lead member for Children and Family Services. So welcome, Mrs. Taylor. So if I hand over to you, Gurjit, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just as an overview, the report gives the work of the community safety team on behalf of the local authority over the last year. I think the key things to pull out really are around the work that's being done on domestic abuse following the Domestic Abuse Act and the funding that we've been receiving over the last few years. There's a lot of work at the moment around counter-terrorism, the Prevent agenda, for which we've been recognised by the Home Office for doing some really positive work. And then we've been doing a lot of work around antisocial behaviour. There's a new government action plan, which puts new powers on the OPCC. So we've been doing a lot of work around that. Again, there's some Home Office funding attached to that. Which we at the County Council are leading in purchasing, procuring a new antisocial behaviour case management system to provide support to victims and manage perpetrators across Leicestershire. So happy to take any questions through you, Chair.
Thank you, Gurjit. Did you have anything before we begin, Mrs. Taylor, to add? Okay. Okay, so over to the panel members. Any questions, comments for Gurjit on this report? Yes, Mr. Richardson.
Just a very quick one. Page 18, the chart at 35. Fully welcome the funding which is there for helpline support for male victims and outreach support for male victims of domestic abuse. I just wondered why we differentiate. Should we not have one service that covers domestic abuse for all people rather than differentiate it into two pots? I just wondered, well, do we have to do that because there's specific funding for men and for women?
Thank you. That's a really, really good question. So when the funding was announced, the government did state that they wanted us to work with by and for organisations. We also undertook a strategic needs assessment to look at where the gaps were across Leicestershire in reporting. And what we found was that lesbian, gay, bisexual community were not reporting, nor were the gypsy traveller community, nor were men, and Black, Asian, multi-ethnic victims were less likely to report as well. So as well as the male victim provision, we have also looked at those other areas and put specific support in, and we have found that has increased reporting. As well as the male victim helpline, we've also procured 1 unit of dispersed accommodation for males, because male victims can't, for example, go into a refuge with women, and that's had already, there's people, it's being used already.
Thank you, Gurjit. Sharon, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, apologies for being late.
Mr. Bannister.
Thank you very much for the report, Gurjit. And the summer obviously had a number of major disorders, riots across the country for all sorts of reasons. But it appeared to be quite low level in Leicester and Leicestershire. I just wondered to hear your views about why that might be the case. And looking ahead, particularly in terms of the continuing war in the Middle East, what actions need still to be in place to ensure that trouble doesn't erupt locally with regard to some really seriously held views by some members of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bannister. I think one of the reasons we didn't see some of the issues other parts of the country saw is because of our relationships and our community cohesion. We work very closely with community policing, with the police force generally, and with the counter-terrorism officers. And we've got really good, as I say, communication and relationships with our community leaders and with the communities generally. And I think that will continue. The other thing is we do a lot of work around the space before counter-extremism and terrorism, so hate prevention and identification. And Leicestershire County Council has led on that for a good number of years. And since the disorder in Leicester City are working more closely with us, but we've always had that as a priority across Leicestershire. So we work really closely with our communities, supporting them, and we do it corporately as well, supporting them when they feel that there's a hate crime or a hate incident. And I genuinely think that's one of the reasons, because our communities feel supported and we have that communication with them.
Through you, Chair. Clearly, touch wood, things seem to be working, and well done for that community cohesion work. Long may it continue.
Do any other members have any comments or questions? No. Mrs. Taylor, do you want to come in at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. A few connection issues. No, I've got nothing further to add, and if there's any particular questions that members want to ask.
Okay. Any further comments, questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you, Gurjit and Sharon, for presenting a very good report, and thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Cheers. This brings us on to item 9 on the agenda, which is Leicestershire County Council's Customer Experience Strategy Consultation, which is on pages 23 to 76 of your paperwork. Jane Glasgow will be joining us, the Assistant Director of Corporate Resources, to present this report, along with Derabella Hadley, who's the Head of Customer Service, and Katie Murphy, who is the change lead for cross-cutting programs. Mr. Brecken is in attendance as well. Good morning, Mr. Brecken. Thank you for attending. We will just wait for Mrs. Glasgow, I think is just arriving, to present this report. Good morning and welcome to the meeting. I will hand over to you, Jane, who I think is presenting this report. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody. So, purpose of our visit today is to get members' view on the draft strategy, which is included in the pack that you have. There are a number of appendices in there that I think are quite important as well, including the draft strategy that's been out for consultation, the informal engagement report, and the draft equality impact assessment report. The report introduces the purpose of the strategy and what it seeks to achieve. It also advises of feedback from customers received so far, both in informal engagement as well as through formal consultation. Feedback from both exercises will inform the final strategy. The customer experience strategy is a significant step forward in getting a shared commitment for things that are important to our customers. We know that when we get it right for the customer, it's likely to cost the council less in the long run. Strategy comes as a key output from the wider corporate customer program that recognizes a need for shared commitment to our customers across all council services and provides the vehicle for increasing the customer focus that the council needs to embed with all its processes and practices. There is no one-size-fits-all. The repeatable customer review approach described in the strategy ensures that reviews of customer service in different areas follows the same framework, but the solutions implemented to deliver improvement will focus on the needs of the customer groups associated with that specific area. The strategy encourages those customers that can go online to do so that those customers who are unable to self-serve online can continue to access services with a human touch. Those would be services by voice, telephony, paper, etc., as is needed. Customer insight tells us so far that there are plenty of customers that would be happy to go online, assuming the information and functionality is sufficient to facilitate this. But again, we don't underestimate the importance that email and telephone channels continue to play for people. The council has already seen successes in different areas where the strategy principles are already being applied. Some of these successes are outlined in the paper, and there was a detailed report to Adult Social Care Scrutiny on Monday this week, which was well received. Members were grateful for the positive steps forward in ensuring that the phone lines were accessible and responsive to our service users. We recognize that there are further things that we could do end-to-end across council services to break down the team silos in order to improve communication flows back through to customers. This is a common issue across many services that the strategy will seek to unpick through a combination of cultural, practice, process, data, and technology changes. I'll also add to that that when we brought this previously and in other engagements we've had with this body, member queries is also a key issue that we need to address, and we're currently working on that. Plans are in place to improve how we deal with member inquiries and deal with those in a much more responsive and consistent manner as well. So that's the report in summary.
Thank you, Jane. Arabella, Katie, Mr. Brecken, do any of you want to add anything before we open it up to members? Okay. Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jane. As you mentioned, we had an excellent report to adults and communities on Monday, which I think was welcomed by the committee there. And we did ask several questions around call times and that type of thing. And having had time to reflect since Monday, because it's always the things you remember afterwards, doesn't it? But I think it's relevant here is we have some figures in the chart here, don't we, on page 34 about the number of calls and emails. Now, I know we get quite a bit of information on call answering times, but it just occurred to me following that meeting, and particularly with a comment that Councillor King made at the meeting, was that we don't get any information on email answering times. So, it would be useful perhaps to know how quickly we respond to an email, because if we want to use email as a further urgent channel going forward, time answering to an email has got to be fairly quick, otherwise people are going to ring. And also, anecdotally, you always hear from your residents, and I'm sure they're wrong, but it's our duty to have the information to tell them they're wrong and show them they're wrong, was that there is still this anecdotal evidence that it's more difficult to get a response on a Monday and a Friday. So how do we ensure adequacy of staffing at the same level across the week? Is there any evidence to support the anecdotal evidence from residents? And would it be possible perhaps to have a breakdown of call answering times across the week? So we see what the call answering time is a Monday compared to a Wednesday, for instance. Because I've no doubt that we actually do it well, as evidenced by the report we had on Monday. But it's always nice if we can go back to our residents with that information and say, look, this is what you might believe, but these are the facts. And I think it's helpful if councillors have facts. So I appreciate there's a lot there. But the main one, I think, is that how do we bring urgent email channels into line, and what is our standard response for responding to an email?
If it's okay, I'll refer to get Darabella to answer the email question. On the wider question around stats and call volumes, we absolutely do have that information and can happily provide it. One of the things that we can say about the CSC, for example, is like every contact center out there, the amount of management information and control we have is incredibly sophisticated. We know what everybody's doing every moment of their working day. It's the nature of the environment, so absolutely we can provide that. But I'll pass over to Darabella for a more complete answer.
Yeah. So with regards to emails, we have several kind of queues that come into the CSC, and we have various different SLAs. So members' email boxes, all inquiries are responded to within 1 working day. We generally have a within 5 working day rule. However, at exceptional times that might increase. That doesn't happen very often, but internally we'll set our SLA within 3 working days. Quite honestly, I'll need to gather some statistics for you so I can share those, no problem. But I know, because we have discussions every single morning about what our workload looks coming in, what we expect. We forecast workloads based on information that we already know about historically. And for a lot of the time, we are working things on the day, or certainly within those 3 working days. So it really depends on where it comes in, but we have staff resource allocated to those queues every single day. And we deal with things like social media inquiries and things like that we also have to maintain, and also internal inquiries. So there might be some information that have come back from colleagues in highways, as an example. And those queues, again, we make sure that we're responding to those timely. But I can provide some specific stats for you after this. That's no problem. If I could just say, in terms of your comment about call answering times across the week. So we do have reports, we have data that shows us exactly the call volume that comes in on a Monday and we have that by 15 minutes. So very, very detailed information. I know that within services that we support, Monday is our busiest day, and as the week goes on, it gets less and less. So Friday tends to be the less busier day. Thursdays, I think, a little bit busier, and Wednesday not so. So we know exactly what the trend looks like. Now that will vary depending on seasonality, depending on what's going on. And we keep a very close eye on that. And we have, as Jane mentioned, some sophisticated workforce management tools at our disposal that allow us to resource accordingly. So we can scale up or scale down depending on where the volume is.
No, thank you for that, and I look forward to seeing the figures. Just something you said actually prompted another question, so I apologise for that. Especially as Jane says, you've got all the information under the planet. So do we ever do any correlation? Because I appreciate the value of moving to an email channel can suit people because they can just do an email on the go and us. Do we have any information about those people that have sent an email in and then have subsequently called because they don't believe they've received a response? Because that would be useful to know, because that would be the way then of cutting down or looking at how we answer emails to cut down on further calls, which would then be unnecessary.
I think the question you're asking varies depending on the service area. So what we don't have is one single customer service centre for the council. We've got quite a sort of a multiple kind of situation of front doors. So part of this strategy is about trying to get that consistency. And I think all the questions you raise are absolutely really, really helpful. We just kind of build that into the final draft of the strategy. I think depending on the service you're talking about, there is not necessarily that direct correlation between email traffic and calls because of the nature of our customer relationship management system, which is relatively light in terms of the functionality. We've got an opportunity through our planned procurement coming up around that to think actually what is the requirement to sort of make sure we've got that kind of good visibility of that single view of the customer depending on the service area, so we can build that into those requirements. I don't think email is necessarily a channel that's used for all of our customer groups. So for example, in adult social care, emails is not the main route in. You're either calling or you're completing an online portal form. Emails are very much isolated for the use of professionals and those sort of bodies. So, but yeah, the visibility between whether someone has emailed us and called us, we haven't got that single view at the moment. I think it's fair to say. Whether or not Darabella's got anything to add from a customer service centre perspective, I'm not sure.
No, that's exactly right. We don't have that direct correlation. We have other information. So as an example, we could see repeat callers and those kind of things that are useful, but not that direct correlation.
Okay, Mrs. Page.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. And I'll repeat what I say all the time. While we're looking towards maximising taxpayers' money, I wouldn't like to see that personal touch is eroded, because if you're phoning Barclays Bank or even DVLA, if you've got something that doesn't match the press 1, press 2, and there's something different, you've had it, and you're going round and round. So I'm very, very keen that, because we are paid by the taxpayer, we are a service industry, that we retain that personal touch for people who need it. I have to ditto Terry's comment that I also get an awful lot of comments of nobody's ever working at County Hall. We can't get through. So it is nice if we do have the statistics to back it up. But my actual point is, in the report, it does say that, and I don't know where it is now, that people aged over 55 are online now. Well, yes, it is true, people are online, but when I refer my residents and I put out links to the website, they use emails if I email them direct. But if I ask them to go online and look up what they're asking me, and I'll say it's all on the website, they say, well, do you think I've got all day to sit there and trawl through endless county council pages? So it brings me to my point I'm actually wanting to make. In point 8 and 22, you refer to the SMSs you've sent out. And in point 8, over 3,000 customers were directly contacted via SMS, text messages, and 316 survey responses were received. Now, that is an awful lot of responses when we're talking 2% normally on a public consultation. That's 10%. And I'm finding that a lot of residents, if you send them a text message, they're on WhatsApp groups, they respond, they look at it straight away. If they have, it is instant. So what are we actually doing to encourage that? Are we going to build onto that? Are we building that? So just talk me around it. And can we also in future, when we get data, how the responses on text messages actually fare in relation to everything else? So thank you very much for a great report and looking forward to your reply.
So on the text message side, what we've been finding, especially with some of the work that we've done around transport and things like that, is we can reduce a lot of the demand we have coming into the contact centers by proactively messaging people. And we're very, very lucky in that central government has got a tool available to us as local authorities that allows us to send SMSs and to send emails and so forth out. So we've proactively used the technology to sort of preempt when we know people are likely to call, give them an update, you know, your application is still in progress, we're still thinking about you, these types of things. Now, that is not universal yet. This is still very much in its early stages. And it's been very, very effective. I agree with you. It's been incredibly effective because actually, I think most people, they just want to know that we're actively working on something, that we haven't just abandoned them. You know, so if a admissions process, for example, takes months, but if you're getting those regular contacts and stuff, I think that's very important. As technology changes, I think we will see more and more use of text. WhatsApp is an interesting one. Obviously, recently members have been receiving access to that. We're seeing more of it coming up, even on television and things like that. So it's an area for us to explore. We haven't explored in significant depth yet, but it'll be really interesting, especially as our evolution comes along with AI and these types of technologies as well, and some of the integration tools and stuff that come behind it. But it is something for us to take on board, and I completely agree with you. It's a great channel.
If I may just come back, I agree, because it's instant and people, you know, it's all about instant now. But have you also, or are you going to explore the sort of WhatsApp chats? Because when I'm talking to my insurance, somebody comes along and, you know, and I find that is quite good. And residents, you know, always say, have you got something? And I said, not yet, you know, we're only council. But are you exploring that as part of it?
I think it's something we'll take on board, is the simple answer. We are exploring various chat technologies. We had previously piloted, I think about 3.5 years ago now, Facebook Messenger and tools like that. At that point, the technology wasn't particularly there, and it wasn't particularly effective, but technology's moved on a lot. So the simple answer is, again, yes, we'll absolutely bring that into our consideration as we go through it. But we are actively exploring a number of different chat technologies, and there'll be further papers on that in the future. Yeah.
Mr. King. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, thanks for the report. And I think this is a very, you know, really this is probably one of the most important things we need as a county council to review and get right, really, because if we don't get the first point of contact, first point of information right with our service users, residents, and other stakeholders, then the chances of recovering that later and sorting it out are incredibly complicated and consume an awful lot of time for staff members and just for their financial resources. But having looked at the informal response, the 318 respondents, what's very clear is that the people who responded, telephone response, being able to access information via the phone is very important still, and I expect that'll continue to be the case. But one of the things that gets raised with me quite a lot is why, as a county council, we're not using apps more. Why we don't have a reporting app that someone can go on one of these gadgets and actually say, there's a pothole, snap a photo, send it off. I know that exists, other authorities are doing it elsewhere, but for some reason we haven't got that facility. So what we do is we either force someone to ring up via the phone system, or they have to then go onto our website, go through 5 layers of web pages to then find the web reporting page to then report the information. Now, to me, that's too many layers. Having looked at our homepage, it's too confusing. There's too many strands on the web page, and really, I hope as part of this work, some work's being done to look at the homepage of the county council to make it easier, simpler for people to understand where they need to report things, where the point of contact is, because actually, online is really important for residents to be able to do that. But actually, if you don't know where, I often get asked by residents, well, where do I find the right page? And I think that's something that I'm not sensing from this report is something that's really being looked at. And maybe it is, but I think, to me, the two things that are missing from this is, what are we doing about apps, and what are we doing about the web page, the home page, and also other pages of the website, so we can just make it easier and more intuitive for how people actually use the internet, instead of how the system would like them to use it, if I can put it like that. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
I think it's a very good point. Our current web presence is dated. There are two ways about it, I think, is a fair assessment. It was built at a time and it needs updating. The digital team, in conjunction with the comms team, has started the early stages of what we need to do to address that. So that work has begun and it is in our pipeline, in line with some of the upcoming procurements around customer experience platforms and those types of things, so that we can link those things together as we go through. Because as you can imagine, it's quite a significant undertaking to review that and to rewrite it. But it is absolutely acknowledged, and it is absolutely on the roadmap, and it will be done in conjunction with the customer program and the customer experience strategy as well. So completely agree with you. We're also looking at the technologies to enhance how people are working with our website. So enhanced search capabilities, those types of things, to make it much more intuitive. So somebody can just go on to it and say, I'd like to report a pothole or whatever, and you just use natural language, and then would automatically get that sort of information up to them. And again, we're simplifying forms, processes, and those types of things in order to do it. In terms of apps, we look at apps about once every 2 years or so. And what we've been finding is, because of the very transactional nature of the engagement we have with our citizens and our residents, etc., is that there isn't necessarily the stickiness to warrant the quite significant expense that an app would have versus that sort of virtual app that a good website would perform. And we do keep it under review every couple of years. And so I think at this point, whilst we're again happy to consider apps and look at apps and take that under advisement as part of this revised process, I would anticipate that we would probably look to have or be recommending a revised interface, revised user experience on the website that actually just simplifies it, makes it much, much easier to engage with it, given the nature of those sorts of relationships that we have with our citizens and so forth. But again, it won't be a decision ultimately for us to make. It'll be a decision that we will propose as we go through the channels and so forth.
Yes, thanks for that, Jane. So I heard what you're saying, but I do really think that actually we're missing something. We customer experience, it starts right at the beginning, and if a lot of our contacts are coming through the website, if we haven't got that if that's not meeting our user expectation, and you're right, it's incredibly dated. I mean, it's been dated a long time. It hasn't just happened. So I think, we've either got to seriously think about this and bring it, screeching up to date and get it fit for purpose for the future pretty quickly, because, our user expectation has risen because other organizations have carried on moving. We seem to have, stagnated a bit in this area. With the greatest respect, and I think customer expectations, as Councillor Page was talking about WhatsApp, it's kind of moved on a long way, and we've not kept up. And whilst you're talking about let's change, improve our customer experience strategy, and that's absolutely right. Are we making a sufficient leap? I know we've got to do it probably in micro, in small steps. We can't necessarily do it all at once. But I'm not got a sense at the moment from what you said of how long that timeline is going to be, and looking at something every couple of years. Apps have been around a long time. I'm just concerned, I'm only reflecting back what residents say to me. Why haven't you got an app? It will be so much easier if I could report things, not just highways, but other things, and apply for things using an app. And then, they've got relatives or friends around the country who experience that, have that experience with other councils, and then say, well, why can't you do that in Leicestershire? And I can't answer them because I don't know why we can't do it. Thank you.
Could I just come back on that? I mean, I take on board, I look around different councils' websites, but I think the difference with Leicestershire is funding. I'm sure if Jane had another 10 sort of app designers and web designers within her team that were funded, I think we'd be able to do a lot more than we do, but I think we do the very best with what we've got. And I think the system is still fit for purpose, but yet we are always looking at, Jane said every 2 years we looked at, certainly the potholes one is something that is out there, people can report it, but we still use our own internal system, and the link to the page on the website that still delivers that, but I accept you've got to then use your phone to go online, you've got to find Wi-Fi, you've got to then go onto the website, but it's not ideal. But I think, we are still delivering, and I think the numbers that we've got, 130,000 phone calls a month, 1.5 million a year, that shows we're still delivering for all residents who say, I haven't got an app, I haven't got the internet, I'm not a silver surfer. So I think that shows that people are still using the old-fashioned methods, and I'd like to think we are delivering, but I'm sure if we said to Jane, we've got another 10 members of staff we can give you to deliver that, I think we'd do it. Some councils do it, but I'm sure they're probably the super deliverers, I'm sure the ones that are better funded than we are, but we are listening, and I think that's part of what we have here. So
if I can just come back on that, Mr. Bracken, so basically, what I'll disagree with you on this. This is about what this has been presented as. We are doing this because we need to save money. Basically, and if we're going to save money, we've got to reduce the number of people, essentially, that work in this area. That's will make it more cost effective. So if we're going to do that, we've got to find the most cost effective way of doing that. Now, you've just said, let's just carry on the way we sorry, I didn't say that, but we've got lots of people who email us. Email and telephoning is very time consuming and very costly to do. So if we're going to get that channel shift, this is what this is about. We have to look at channel shifting to other ways that people find easier to use. And the thing that residents tell me that they find easier to use is using apps, because they do it for lots of other things, and they don't understand why the county council isn't able to do that. And you say it's about money. Well, I'm sure even within the constraints we have, I don't see why we can't find money to invest to save, because this is what this is about, saving money in the longer term over the MTFS. And I think that does need a bit more thinking about how we can do this, rather than just saying, well, we haven't got the money to employ another 10 people. Well, I accept that, but there must be other ways of doing it. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Mr. Hunt next.
Just on this point about new technology, it is possible that you can be ahead of the curve sometime, and you can have a wonderful app and it works for a couple of years, and then somebody says, why is it out of date? So you've got to marshal your resources in that respect. It's a simple question I had, and it's sort of crying out really, no doubt from the general public who don't see things the same as we do. Is there any thoughts about, at least at the front end, combining with districts to produce one system? As most people understand, the council is the council and not necessarily Leicestershire or Charnwood or wherever. So is that something we talk about, or is it something that is too complicated to handle?
There have been discussions, especially with NHS partners, over the last few years around centralizing sort of that, fundamentally that user ID, that persona, that citizen perspective. The NHS is currently working on bringing their things together so that they can have a single view of a patient. And the reason that I bring that up is the experiences that they're having is it's been incredibly complex. It's been incredibly complex. To achieve that, it's taken them many years. We've been engaged with local partners trying to think, how could we do this? How could we engage? And of course, then that feeds down into the districts. It is something I would love to see. I think it would be great. I think it would be great as an authority. I think in the current very, very broad technology structure that we have and disparate structure we have between districts, between other partners like the NHS, etc., it would be incredibly challenging and incredibly expensive. But I do agree that it would be an admirable thing to do, and it would be something that would be great to achieve. I just think it would be prohibitively expensive at this point in time.
Thank you. Mr. Bannister.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jane, for the presentation of the report. Particularly struck by paragraph 19 in the report, which lists the expected benefits if the strategy is adopted and is successful. 19A talks about the reduction in customer complaints, and that led me to look at the strategy document a bit more detail, noting that almost 3,600 inquiries were dealt with by the complaints team in respect of the lack of communication that's going on, which to me would translate to an awful lot of time, effort, money being involved. And of course, 19A talks about wanting to get a reduction of that. Noting from the report that the number of those complaint team inquiries increased in the last year by 5%, I did wonder what the trajectory has been. Has it always been going up and up? And really my question to you is, if this is the expected benefit, have you got a target in mind about bringing that 3,600 down? I'd be interested to know what the target might be. Thank you.
I'll answer that one if that's okay. So in the paragraph within the strategy, it does reference that not all complaints are driven by kind of a lack of information and communication, although it's recognised it's part of it. And the first thing we need to do is be able to separate out the way in which we record complaints at the moment, so that performance monitoring moving forward gives us a more accurate baseline of what proportion is associated with this, customer experience related things. So that is on our sort of action plan, if you like, to do as a first step, so that we can then think realistically about what that looks like for the future. We do know from within that 3,600 of complaints that there are kind of quite significant trends around where those areas of dissatisfaction lie, with the SEN service being kind of quite high up on that. So we've just started some work within the programme to try and start to improve those communication flows and information. So I would hope that when we're forecasting forward, we should see that reduced, but we just need to work out what proportion of those formal complaints can be influenced, if you like, by the work that we're doing versus things that are more linked to decision making, so dissatisfaction in the decisions that they've received and things like that, which we're not able to influence within the strategy.
Thank you for that. I'm sure we'll keep an eye on it and wish you every success.
Mr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chair. You've done a lot of sampling in July and August, online and telephone conversations. I fully appreciate that the response you get is not huge. In fact, it's small enough almost not to be representative of the overall number of people that have used the services. A lot of people didn't fill in the questionnaire. I just wondered, given the level of analysis that you've done, is it actually meaningful and worthwhile, particularly bearing in mind the people who are responding? For some reason or other, they are more likely to respond if they are actually dissatisfied with the service than they are if they are satisfied. There's a huge amount of neither not responded, but are you actually being fair to yourselves One, is it representative? And two, is there a better way of doing it, getting an independent company to do it, to give some really meaningful data? You could well argue, well, actually, 90% of the people didn't respond, therefore 90% of the people are actually quite satisfied. But I just wonder whether we're doing the right thing and whether we're spending a huge amount of time analysing a disproportionately small number of respondents. I mean, I don't know how many people use the online service or the website during July and August. I mean, we've got a population of 700,000. I fully appreciate they don't all contact the council, but are we doing ourselves down by using that sort of information? Just interested in your comment.
First, we have got other mechanisms by which we are capturing ongoing customer feedback, and one of the things within the strategy is to create more kind of consistent and embedded ways of capturing customer satisfaction and service levels across the organisation. So that was a snapshot, but in addition to that, we have through the work we've been doing more direct analysis of customer journeys. So whether that be actually tracking examples of what happened to a customer's journey throughout, for example, adult social care. So we've got a bit more nuanced information around what's happening there. We've also been looking at the detail of what's happening within a call. So actually, why are people calling, listening to those calls and really understanding what sort of recommendations we need to put forward. So that informal engagement is just one of a number of different sort of customer insight approaches we're using. But I do appreciate what you're saying. Yeah, there's bound to be more people satisfied than the survey assumes. But I think from the findings that we've got within the survey, it does feel like a good representation of what services are finding within their services. You know, I think a lot of services would say things do feel a bit chaotic because of the level of failure demand, avoidable contact that people are getting through because of that lack of proactive comms. So it is to be balanced with sort of the wider insights that we're capturing and what we need to do moving forward. I take the point.
Okay, thank you.
The Frisbee. Thank you, Chair. Just sort of really drawing back on some of the points that a variety of colleagues have made in the room this morning, Mr. Brecken, Mr. Hunt and Mr. King, about digital communication. Sorry to revisit that. I myself am going through we're looking at the way we communicate. And first point, I think there is certainly mileage in what Mr. Hunt said in terms of harmonisation. Certainly some of the people I represent don't see the difference between a district and a county council. They don't know who does the potholes, who does the bins. They see us as one entity. Therefore, I'm wondering why a harmonised internet access isn't explored even further. And again, part of the process we're going through, looking at my own company's comms, the word that's repeatedly said to me is simplification. There was a period 15, 20 years ago when everybody wanted a fully animated, all singing, all dancing website, when actually over a third of the people who access just want to know what it is we sell, where we sell it from, and most importantly, can I have a telephone number so I can talk to somebody about it? So it doesn't really need to be much more complex than that. So I don't know why we seem to be sort of over-egging the cake, but I really do think there is mileage in looking at a harmonised system and a simplified system, and just having the basics on there, because I'm by no means a Luddite, but sometimes I get extremely frustrated when I just want to navigate around the simplest things, like just who do I contact for this, that or the other. Thank you, Chair.
If I may come in on that one, I think totally agree on the simplification side. I think where we've had the most success is where we have really simplified processes. We as local government officers have a tendency to speak in local government speak. You know, that's the nature of the beast. And you can see this on our website for things that we haven't updated yet, where we do have tendency to overcomplicate and almost use legalese on there. And I tend to agree with you. When we simplify that language down, we simplify the form structures and things like that. That's where we're seeing 96, 97% adoption rates, because we've made it easy. And I completely agree. And that goes for the back end processes as well. It makes a huge difference. Again, I think on the harmonization side, I think there's an interesting thing to explore there around the website, even if it isn't the systems. And I will take that on board. I think it will be challenging given the political landscape, but I think it's certainly something that's worth exploring.
Just, if I can come back through you, Chair. Jane, thank you for that. It is just about efficiency savings. And again, just if we can just review the esoteric language that we use. I'm from Melton Mowbray, and we continuously use the phrase MMDR, when actually most people in Melton call it the ring road. I don't see why we have to create this esoteric language, like you're saying, that, and all it does is it alienates a lot of our people, and they actually come, can you explain this? So again, if I could just make a request, if we can just keep the language simple, accessible, transparent, that would be really helpful, certainly for me and others, I believe. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, and thank you to all members for their questions and comments on that report, and to Jane, Deborah, Katie and Mr. Brecken for presenting it. Thank you for your time today. That brings us on to item 10, which is Investing in Leicestershire Programme Annual Performance Update, which is pages 77 to 112 on your paperwork. Simone Hines, the Assistant Director of Corporate Resources, is presenting the report, supported by Bulesh Katra, Senior Finance Officer, Andrew Winnington, Strategic Planning and Promotions Partner, and Declan and Mr. Brecken are here for this item as well. So I think, Simone, you are presenting this report, so I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
I am, thank you. So this report presents the annual report for 23-24 for the Investing in Leicestershire programme, and you do have the full report attached as an appendix with a huge amount of detail in, and it does set out the detailed financial performance of the portfolio over those 12 months, and sets out the short-term benefits and also the long-term benefits of the portfolio to the county council. So I'm just going to highlight a few key points, and then we'll probably move to questions, I think, just given the level of detail that's set out in that report. So in summary, the portfolio was valued at 283 million at the end of March 2024, and it contains, as you'll be aware, a mix of rural, office, industrial properties, as well as a development element of the portfolio as well. And then we also have financial investments which are outside of our direct property management. And the reason that we hold that combination of different investments and the non-direct financial investments is to diversify the fund and to make sure that we've got a good spread of investments to spread our risk and improve financial resilience. And there is quite a useful chart on page 85 of the agenda, or page 3 of the report, that shows what that mix of investment is and compared to the previous year. So during 23-24, those investments achieved a net income of 7.6 million for the council. That was after sinking fund contributions as well. So that we took into account the need to top up our sinking fund to make sure that we've got some protection for any repairs and maintenance that we might need to make to the assets. And after making that contribution, we've had net income of 7.6 million. And again, you can see that in more detail on page 86 of the agenda. And then with the exception of industrial and distribution, the other sector of the portfolio all compared favourable in terms of their performance to the wider market. So as an example, the managed direct property portfolio, which excludes those diversifiers and the developments, gave us a total return of 4.1% compared to the market return of 0.3. Now, that just important to bear in mind, that return of 4.1 does include both capital and income. So it's both the annual income that we received on those assets and also the capital appreciation. And I think it's really key to bear that in mind, that the financial benefits of the portfolio are twofold. We do get annual income every year that does help fund the council's day-to-day services, and we've got that long-term capital appreciation as well. Then at the end of the year, we'd invested around 220 million in total in the portfolio. We do have a commitment of 260 million for ILP in the MTFS, so there is some headroom still for further investments, and we have got that built into the MTFS for future years. And sort of selecting those investments and how we might spend that headroom will be dependent on kind of what investment opportunities are available at the time, and will be dependent on sort of officer appraisal of the risk and return that they might achieve for the council. And then towards the end of the annual report, you have got an update on the investment strategy and the recent review that we had from Hymans Robertson on the ILP strategy. That review did conclude that the overall objectives of ILP in terms of what the composition of the fund are, the target returns that we're aiming for, and really the purpose of the fund as a whole do still remain appropriate, and that the strategy that we have for ILP continues to achieve those financial benefits, both short-term benefits for the council, longer-term capital appreciation, and also the wider economic objectives for the county as a whole. And I think that's important to bear in mind as well. So as I said, that's just some key highlights. You have got a huge amount of detail in the annual report itself, but I'll just pause there. I have got Andrew and Bhulesh that can assist with any more technical questions as well.
Thank you, Simone. Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got several questions. You want them all at once? Is that the best way? Oh, okay. Starting on page 85, the summary, the total value by sector. I mean, but for the revaluation in the rural properties, the total fund would have been shown a loss or a reduction rather than not a loss of some £8 million. So the figures are somewhat distorted by the increase in the rural sector. But focusing on the rural sector, for many years, myself and others have made comments here that we haven't felt that our rural properties are being managed and looked after effectively. And I understand that's borne out by the figures for rent arrears, which I do understand is now being tackled. So first of all, can we have an understanding that we are now giving our rural properties that level of management which they've always deserved and which hasn't been there over previous years, and that we're getting on top of this situation and what the management structure is for those properties going forward? I mean, in my time, we've had the awful landfill stuff for 2.6 million. We've clearly got arrears. We're now showing near a true value. I appreciate the caveats down below about how it's valued, but I've always felt we've neglected rural land as it is. Just on a couple of other points, when it comes down to the M69 slips, it makes reference to a delay in a local plan and a Reg 19 slippage. I'm not aware that the council referred to has actually changed its timescales yet. So how we can put the timescales in a report when the council itself hasn't agreed to that timescale would strike me as slightly strange, because it would have to go through the council as a report. And also, we haven't actually explained why there's a slippage in local plans, which is due to the new government policy, which has delayed local plans across the country. So I do think if this is a public report, it should give the context that local plans being delayed because the new government's wish to speed up planning has actually had the opposite effect and delayed local plans being done. And I think we should say so. And just on a picky one, when we're talking about Lutterworth East, if we're going to use a photograph of a development, I do think we should say for illustrative purposes only, because if I'm not mistaken, the picture used is of New Loversthorpe rather than anywhere in Lutterworth.
If I just pick up the rural questions first, then kind of note the point about the increased valuation in rural and how that's sort of skewing the overall valuation. But I guess I just come back to the point that this is a long-term portfolio, and there will be fluctuations in valuation as we go longer term. And I think the key is that the council's aware of kind of the valuation at any one point, and also is able to take advantage where there are, it may be that there's certain elements of the portfolio with attractive valuations, and we want to take advantage of those at any one time. But in terms of the questions about the rural estate kind of not being as well looked after, I think we have been doing quite a lot of work on this over the last 12 months or so. there is an action plan in place now following the review by Savills, and I believe some additional resources to help with tackling that action plan and making sure that we are addressing those shortfalls. But who wants to add anything on that?
Just pick back on a couple of those. The nature of rural is that capital appreciation is always going to exceed revenue returns. I suppose it's the nature of the beast, but notwithstanding, you do make a fair point about kind of where we've been with the rural estate hasn't been where it needs to be. And some of that is, I suppose it's ironically related to that capital thing. We've focused more on kind of, holding the estate and then taking the sort of the windfalls as they've come due. But you're right, we should have had sort of a closer eye on what's sort of happening on those sort of day-to-day farms. And it's become more apparent as well that kind of the objectives of the county council can be sort of furthered by sort of a better use of the rural estate, whether that's renewable power, biodiversity net gain, or different things. So absolutely agree. It's an important point, and there is more sort of opportunities for the council, even if it's non-financial, to exploit from that. So there's we've done quite a bit of work just sort of looking at where we are, comparing it to sort of the private government, sort of other local government authorities, but also we've started to use Savills a little bit as sort of an expert in the sector to sort of pick out specific bits of work for us. So we're sort of gradually working through, I suppose, the different aspects of managing a rural estate, using Savills not just to get sort of to take us wider from local government, more into kind of actually what is a good standard for England per se, regardless of who looks after it, and start to improve those. So Savills has been focusing on the rent reviews, making sure that we're getting the income in from the estate that we can do, and providing some support on the debt side of things. But we're just working through that sort of, I suppose, piece by piece. And as we do that, we're kind of forming a view of what is the right sort of management in the future, because in the past it has been 100% internal management, and I don't think that's healthy. I think we do need to have a better blend of kind of internal management to make sure we're dealing with the tenants in the right way, because at the end of the day these are residential properties as well, so we need to make sure we're looking after our tenants, but also making sure we're getting that sort of best practice from the market in there as well. So we're still forming our view of what that's going to be, but it is likely to be a blended approach going forward rather than a fully in-house approach that we've had in the past.
Andrew's going to pick up the other two questions.
Yeah, on the M69 question, the timing, or the reply on the timing for the Blaby local plan, that's very much based on our assessment of what the information available is, both on the Blaby website and from conversations with officers at the Blaby, because obviously as part of the promotion consortium for the Stony Stanton site, for example, we're in regular touch with officers at Blaby district, and therefore we fully appreciate the situation in terms of the plan being pushed back. I think we've said, or we do say in the thing, that it's likely not to take place until 2025. I think that's our assessment of where the situation is at the present time. And obviously the reason and the logic that you gave obviously substantiates that, and we're fully aware of the implications of the proposed NPPF changes and the like. In respect of the Lutterworth East illustration, that actually came out of a vision document that was prepared for Lutterworth East back in 2014-15. It might well have been also plagiarised from New Lubbersthorpe, but that's where it actually came from.
I didn't say we shouldn't use it. I just said it should so for illustrative purposes, so it doesn't confuse residents. I accept your premise about the local plans, but I think you made my point. It should have made that comment in there about why local plans are being delayed. And I think we as a council would take great umbrage if another council published a document actually conjecturing on what they might actually come out with a public document that has to be approved by a council and reported to the public. So I don't think anything is wrong with us saying we would anticipate with the changes, the MPPF, etc., we could see local plans being delayed. I don't think we should be specific, and I would hate it. I mean, if I'd be the first to complain if someone made a comment about Leicestershire County Council doing something which we hadn't yet put through our procedures. Coming back to the farms, I mean, I'm really heartened to hear, but I mean, this committee for the last almost 4 years has been commenting on the farms, the management of the farms, and therefore it would appear from your comments that you agreed the farms haven't been managed. So why was it allowed to carry on so long that this process of not managing our assets in the rural sector effectively was allowed to continue? Did we just not realise, despite the comments of this committee, that there was an issue that needed to be addressed earlier, which certainly came to a head when we had the waste tipping on one of our properties? And we said at that time that I remember sitting there saying, well, surely all farms are being, someone's going around at least, physically every 6 months and looking at them, etc. Now, I welcome the fact that we now recognise perhaps we can't do it internally and we need to go outside. I'm just concerned about why the process of getting to this stage has taken so long.
Just come back on the farms initially. I didn't say they hadn't been managed, just said we recognise they could be managed better, which is kind of a world apart in truth. The first farm issue, even if you're inspecting every 6 months, that's not necessarily going to pick it up. I mean, police were involved, other farms in the area got sort of hit as well. So it's not great. And like I say, we should have managed the estate better, but things like that, it's very, very difficult with sort of a rural estate to kind of completely avoid issues like that. And it's a national problem with sort of illegal waste dumping. There's a site in Essex. It's kind of, even though the Environment Agency are aware of, there's kind of trucks kind of turning up sort of multiple times a day. So but like I said, I don't want to sort of gloss over, do accept we could sort of make more out of the estate. It's a good asset for us to have as a sort of an organisation, and we need to build on that. In terms of why it took so long, it just comes down to priorities. In truth, it's very hard to kind of get to recruit people who are sort of experts in rural estate. We've got some sort of, we're lucky enough to have some internally in the council, but not enough probably to sort of actually create that mass to actually sort of do it ourselves. It's just, and with everything else going on with the council, we're sort of trying to review the kind of the property portfolio as a whole, all the council assets, making sure we make the savings. It just sort of got pushed to one side. So it's one of those, do accept, should have done a better job, but I don't think it's fair to say we weren't managing it. It's just we weren't managing it as well as we could do and not making the most of it for the council. In terms of your other point about the reference to the local plan, we'll change that before the report goes to cabinet. I think that's a fair call, that we should be mindful of what we're saying about other organisations and make sure we get that right. So we'll take that action to just make sure we tweak it before it goes through to cabinet.
This is Paige.
Thank you for the report. Not being a financial analyst, I was wondering if you could explain something to me in layman's terms. On page 86, I've got a paper copy because computer won't work. We have the breakdown on what it cost and whatever, and then it states that there is a total of 206.4 million, representing an increase. On page 93, we then have 283 million, and Simon just referred to 220 million being available to invest. There is also a figure of 54.8 million of the rural estate, and in the other there is 81.6. So, and the dates are the same. So, in layman's term, explain to me why the figures are different. That's question number one. Then it states there will be an overall return of 3.4%. Now, what I always struggle with are these gross or net figures, and it would be kind of nice to see in a report to say this is 3.4% gross or net, because I always think, talking about farms, any property, there is an awful lot of maintenance to keep these properties up. There is depreciation, and I assume depreciation is covered when we're talking in previous paragraphs of annual overall evaluations. So I assume that fluctuates. But as there is a continual spend that needs to be, accounted for. So is this gross? Where is the spend for the maintenance reflected? So that is, I think, very much my question. And also, when we are looking at later on where we're talking Lutterworth East, Leaders Farm, and whatever else. So we're talking about the yield and the expected outcome, but we never actually talk how much it actually cost the council to get these properties ready. So if it is 50 million to get something to the state where we can get a 6% yield, is it then worth it? And thank you very much for the report.
Thank you. I'll start off and then I'll probably hand over to Beulah for some details as well. In terms of your first question around the different figures quoted in the report for valuations, I think they're all on referring to slightly different issues. So the 206 million, for instance, on page 86 is our direct property asset and development, which comes to the total of 206. The 284 earlier on in the report is our total portfolio. So that will include not just the directs and the development, but also include the diversifiers as well, for instance. So there's just comparing slightly different elements of the portfolio. And then the 284 is the total value of the portfolio. The 220 million that I think I referred to as being spent, that's what the current spend, that's what the current spend on the portfolio is. But the 284 is the current valuation. So again, slightly different basis of interpreting those figures, I guess. And then in terms of the overall return of 3.4, I believe that is net. So it will be after taking account of things like the sinking fund contributions and any capital works done in year. But at that point, I think I'll hand over to.
So that is a net figure after all the expenses have come out. Yeah.
Yeah. We quote net figures across the board. So the 7.6 million, the profit that the ILT made for the year is a net figure, inclusive of taking 2 million to the sinking fund as well. So we're building this sinking fund to help us manage things like repairs, maintenance, and improvements to our sites, and that sinking fund will grow over time. So it's a net number.
Thank you, Bhulesh. So that actually then takes care of my next question. So if it is all net, that means that all of the expenses have been taken out at source. Am I correct?
Yeah, expenses are taken out, but importantly, that sinking fund should field us also in the future. So, events like the tipping that we saw at one of our farms.
Thank you. So if I'm going then back to the generated perceived profit that a site will bring. So if we're talking, not to go back to the papers, if we're saying a site A will bring 6% annual profit over the next few years, that then is also a net figure, having taken out already all of the expenses to make the site ready for purchase and development. And so where would we see the figures, what the site actually costs?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, if we're developing a site, we'll have a financial appraisal. That financial appraisal will take into account all the acquisition costs, development costs, marketing costs, all the costs you can think of, plus a forecast for what we expect that site to make into the future, usually rent. And the figures quoted are then net over the full amount of the acquisition or the development.
Thank you very much, Bhulesh.
Mr. King.
In the actual report, in respect of the Leaders Farm South site, there's a paragraph there which sets out the sort of information I think that you were looking for insofar as there's an expected rent of 550 for expenditure, which totals 8 point something, and a return of 6.2. So that sort of sets out the figures that we look at the time that we're planning these projects.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. King.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So before I make my main comment, I just got a query, Simone, about what you said right very early on. You said that there was some headroom in the amount of money that the County Council had available to still invest, and unfortunately, I didn't quite catch what you said. So if you could just clarify that, because obviously there's a lot of figures in this report, so I don't get that wrong. Thank you.
So the MTFS has a total commitment for ILP of 260 million. To date, we have spent in the region of 220, I believe. So that's the headroom that's still in the future years of the MTFS for further investments in the portfolio.
Okay, so we've got 40 million that we've identified as we might be able to invest into the MTFS, although the current value, according to the report, is 283 million because of the rather substantial uplift in the rural property valuation. And I do find, just picking up what Mr. Richardson said earlier, I do find that somewhat incredulous that we've got that level of increase. Maybe my maths is wrong, but I make that 338% increase in the value of that asset. In the report, it says 250%. So either way, I do think to have let things get to that state of affairs, so we've got such a significant uplift in valuation, and they don't just happen overnight. There's obviously something gone very wrong there, and I'm not understanding from what you've said so far what that is. But irrespective of that, I just go back to the previous item, which we're talking about improving Leicestershire County Council's customer experience strategy, and the lead member for finance said we haven't got enough money essentially to invest in that. But you've just told me that, and councillors, that we've got 40 million available to us to invest in this investment fund. And actually, weirdly enough, I was at last year's meeting when this was considered, or previous meeting, and I did recall expressing some concerns. On the one hand, I believe in capitalism and markets, but on the other hand, I'm not really sure the county council is well equipped to do this. And having looked at this report very carefully, we've got evaluation, the valuation of the rural estate, the management of the rural estate, and Mr. Richardson said, and I know others have raised this previously, and I'm not saying people have ignored it, but it does seem it was not, shall we say, the priority that members thought it ought to be. So there is some issues there. And then also we've talked about the county council needing to use more external expertise because it hasn't got the ability to have that expertise in-house. So then that just makes me think, well, actually, why are we doing this? And oughtn't we to actually, if we had this money, this 283 million, and I'm not saying we will have it all, but if we had that invested in just a bank account, we get 5% return, and just safe as houses. And yet we seem to be, invested in something which is, by its very nature, there are risks associated with it. We're reliant on other partners delivering their local plans, delivering planning applications in all their various guises. And to me, I'm the jury's out for me at the moment on this. I'm not sure that really this is where the county council should be really, I appreciate historically we've got an estate, we've got land, farms from decades ago. So we probably do need to look at how we dispose of those. But then just bringing it right up to date. Obviously, last week in the budget, the Chancellor announced various changes to the taxation regime and all sorts of things which are still coming out the woodwork. And therefore, what I wanted to understand is, does that have any impact or any bearing of any of the assets that we hold, and are there likely to be any impacts on, in particular, the rural estate, and any of the disposal plans that the fund has in terms of going forward? Thanks very much. Thank you.
If I can take the question on the rural valuations, both sets of rural valuations were undertaken by external valuation companies, and both valuations were undertaken on the basis of the current SITVA guidelines that were in place at the time of the valuation. What happened between the 2 years was that the valuation guidance changed, so that instead of the rural valuation being valued on the basis of an ongoing continual rental stream, which took no account of the length of the tenancies that were on the farms or the end value with vacant possession, whereas the new guidance do take those factors into account. So if you had a farm, for example, that was producing a rent of £10,000 at the time, that would probably be valued at something in the order of £330,000. On the new guidance, if that farm was, or tenancy was due to end in, say, 5 years' time, you would value 5 years' rent, and then you would add to, and then you would take the full freehold open market vacant possession price of that farm deferred 5 years. That is a totally different form of valuation. It's down to the guidance, and obviously that is the result of the situation, because if a company was investing in a long-term agricultural investment, they'd be looking actually at the previous method of valuation rather than the existing one, which is pretty much based on the replacement value of the asset rather than its ongoing valuation of its income potential. I hope that isn't too garbled.
No, I've understood that. Thanks very much. I've got that. But could you just clarify then, does this the government changes to the, in particular, the agricultural tax on agricultural properties? I'm assuming that tenancies aren't able to be handed over in an inheritance basis. But if you just clarify that for me, whether that's likely to have any impact on the valuation or the ability for the council to sell the assets later. Thank you.
Obviously, there's two forms of tenancies ongoing at the moment. The old Agricultural Holdings Act tenancy, local authorities were exempt from the rules regarding succession of tenancy, so that means they didn't apply. On the new ones, the farm business tenancies, they are for set periods of time which can be brought to an end at that period of time or through break clauses through them. They're more aligned with normal business tenancies.
Thank you.
Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think most of the points, particularly regarding farming and farms, have been covered. The only thing I would say is, and I think I'm going back about half an hour now, is that I believe I understood that we are now looking forward in the management of our farms, particularly looking to a more, probably more expert and more continual thing with an outside supplier to help us with this. My point really is, at the end of the day, we're not just dealing with land, we're dealing with people. And if it's badly managed in the past, whether it's our fault, anybody's fault, their fault, to let people get to that state of arrears or bad management, we haven't really helped anybody. We are the landlords, if you like. And if we did that with housing or anything else, we would be in deep trouble. And I think from what I can gather from the officers here, we are now moving in a much more professional, better direction, so that past lessons, what's happened in the past is gone. It's done. We've got to move forward and learn from that and move forward. But I thank the officers very much for their help and for the report. Thank you.
One want to come back on?
Just observations, really. I mean, to me, I take on board the comments around the room. I think we've now got new leadership under Declan since Chris Tambini finished, and I think under Declan's leadership and the team he's now got together, I think changes are being made. Historically, we haven't always focused on areas because we've been too busy in other areas. But I think now we are getting to grips with what this commission historically have talked about when these reports have come forward. I think since 2014, I think we started the investing in sort of Leicestershire programme in its previous form. And we were able as an authority to invest in properties that then gave a return and brought us an income. We have over £200 million worth of properties at the moment, and if we were to sell them and then put that money back into the bank, it would sit in reserves, and I'm sure they'd be very quickly spent. And then that 7-8 million a year that we're currently returning would have to be found from elsewhere. And I think to me, it's been a very successful. I mean, I'm proud of the report. If I look back at the previous years, this investment programme is growing, and I think it delivers for the people of Leicestershire because it is investing in Leicestershire. I'd just say I'd thank officers for the report. And once again, we are now investing in only good business. We can't invest in bad business. That's what we don't do. We have to invest in good business, and I think that is illustrated throughout the report in front of you. So, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Frisbee. Thank you, Chair. After last week's budget, I'm reticent to be drawn into any real discussions around rural farming or farming industries. It's a particularly sensitive issue where we live at the moment. But I'd like to also thank the officers for a report that made death by figures palatable and accessible. I'm just going back to what my colleague Councillor Page said in respect of the financial variances that were in there. And Simone, you used a word, diversifiers, and I'm just going back to that kind of esoteric language, and I apologise. Could you just explain to me what diversifiers are? Thank you, Chair.
I'll take that one. There's a table on page 86. Yeah, 86, and it describes the group of non-direct property investment. So it can be things like pooled property funds, private debt funds, pooled infrastructure funds, and what we call their bank risk share fund. So effectively, they are financial investments which aren't direct property funds, direct property investments.
So they're just generically pulled together into what we call diversifiers.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Mr. Galton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There seemed to be a suggestion that an alternative strategy might be to sell off some of the assets in the county farms. I think that would be entirely the wrong thing to do. It'd be like selling the family silver. I think that the strategy that we've had for many, many years, we need to revisit that. It was twofold. It was firstly to give the opportunity to people to get into farming and be able to farm that would never be able to buy land. You know, it was the opportunity to be able to rent and then move on after they'd had a county farms tenancy, and to be able to get people into farming, as I say, that would never have had the opportunity or the financial ability to do it. So that was the first thing. So that was a service related that we're providing. The second thing is the strategy that where communities, whether it be villages or towns, have expanded, that's then become the edge of the built-up area adjacent to the county farm, and therefore we've been able to take opportunities as they've arisen to get planning permission on that area, and we know what happens when that happens. So as a strategy, I think it's served the county council very well, and we shouldn't be beating ourselves up about it. The management issues, but what we've heard is that the valuation is nothing to do with poor management. It's to do with the rules being changed in the way that valuation is done. So I think we should be quite proud of the county farms estate. There are some other counties that just said, oh, it's not core business, we're not really interested in this, get rid, and did. And I think if we were to look back over 20 or 30 years, that the strategy has brought us both in income. It's a very good story, and I think we should continue it and not look at flogging it off.
Excellent.
Just reflecting on a few of the comments we've had a few conversations internally about sort of just having a bit more of a visible sort of strategy for the estate. I suppose building on what Mr. Galton just sort of said, but what should we get out of it? How do we run it? So I think from, it's obviously sort of something that's close to sort of a lot of members' hearts. We'll commit to sort of bring something back to sort of the scrutiny at some point, just to show actually where we, why do we hold this, almost going back to basics, why do we hold a stake? What's it there for? What's the benefits to wider Leicestershire? And sort of maybe sort of if we sort of like the committee can kick that, get it to a place that we're all kind of pulling in the same direction. But I do agree with Mr. Galton said, it's a great asset to have, and not every authority does have that anymore. And you do see that sort of twofold benefit, whether it's for the individual farmers, the economy that sort of surrounds the farm, but also kind of financially for the county council as well. But we will bring that strategy back to the committee.
Thank you, Declan. Mrs. Page.
Thank you for that, Declan. I think that will be great. But I just bear with me while I'm waffling. I'm really pleased that we've had Savills to look at it, and I'm really pleased that there is a turnaround. And also, Hilary said we're talking about people, but we're also talking about animals. And now the property doesn't work in silos anymore and works closer with trading standard. I think we've come a long way going forward. I mean, Councillor Galton says it is to help people to move on. The cost of land these days, and they're not available. I mean, we have farms around me where some tenants have the use of 2 farms and are quite large. But for me, it's not just about all of that. It is about retaining the land, food production, employment, and it is the wider aspect. And if we are talking about keeping a net zero, and I'm sure that farms, will count to keeping our countryside green. So, I'm really, really pleased that where we are now. And, yes, it had some hiccups, but I'm pleased to where we are now. But I just like to come back and do some waffling on Andrew's point, where he said, yes, it is at the bottom of page 96 and Leaders Farm, what it cost. So bear with me. So Leaders Farm is in my division. It's been laying empty for years. So we could have done something there and could have generated an income. Now, it states there that the cost projected is going to be in the region of 6 million, and income is the units will be 190k per annum. Well, to my basic reckoning, to get the investment back will be about 30 years. Now, to me, that isn't a very good return if we are, plus everything else. Now, I'm not deploring holding this portfolio, because once you sell these things off, they're gone and the money goes down the drain. So while we have it and we're getting income, we can keep investing it to keep our services going, and I'm all for it. But I think, and this is just a comment, we need to analyse how many years we are taking to bring sites forward in general, because we can't keep mucking about and then saying to us, oh, whoopee-doo, it's going to bring us 6.2% and we're getting 190k a year, when it cost us 6 million and years to get to that point. And, and I think, just to put it on the table, maybe we should look at our sites and, analyse and maybe get it more speedy to get an income generation. But thanks for a good report. And all in all, I think it's great work to get 8 million to reinvest into.
Just sorry, can I just go back on that? To spend the 6 million, we're going to be getting 550,000 a year. The 190,000 relates to a previous investment of, I think it's 2.8. So we get the money back in 10 years. It has stood it has stood there for a long while, but obviously we don't build the buildings until we've got somebody signed up to actually occupy them, because obviously if you invested the 6 million and a £6 million building stood there for 10 years, that's far worse.
I don't wish to prolong this discussion, but originally we did have tenants for 4 units, and they withdrew for obvious reason. But we are where we are, and I'm just pointing out that even on 10 years, it's a long time to get back your original investment. Thank you.
Mr. Frizz. Thank you, Chair. Mine's going to be very, very brief. I absolutely stand by my colleague, Councillor Goulton. I have concerns that we seem to have this kind of, in my personal opinion, a short-sighted default reaction as let's flog off things as quickly as we possibly can. I'm not entirely sure that's the way forward, particularly if we go back to what we're called rural Leicestershire. If we start selling off the family silver, as Councillor Goulton says, I think we're going to be bereft and moribund of anything that defines us as a county. So I absolutely couldn't support that anymore. That's all I want to say, Tracy. Thank you.
It was just the same, and obviously the start of the report that was there in section 5, it said that Commission last year looked at the Leicestershire Programme Portfolio Management Strategy for the next 4 years, and that was it was dealt with on the January 2024 of this year, and it was approved in Council on February 24. That's what we're working to. That's the strategy that we're following. And yes, I think we're tightening up our belt and improving our performance on areas that we know we failed on. But yeah, that is the strategy we're running with, and that is meaning protecting our assets and making sure that this investment does return on behalf and the good of the County Council. And I think the only thing I'd say is it is entitled Investing in Leicestershire, and that is what this portfolio does. So.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else got any more questions? Anyone got anything they needed answer to? No? Okay, well, thank you very much to everyone for their comments, and to Simone and everyone else for presenting and answering questions on that item, which moves us to item 11, which is the medium-term financial strategy monitoring, which is on pages 113 to 144 of your report. Declan, I think, is introducing this, or Simone is, and we have Mr. Brecken staying for this item as well. So over to you, Simone. Thank you.
Thank you. So this report is the Council's budget monitoring position based on information at the end of period 6. So we are halfway through the year now, and we now have reasonable trends to be able to base our forecasting on. A summary of the current revenue forecast is shown in the table at paragraph 8 of the report, and there are some appendices that give more information. And we're currently anticipating an underspend in the region of £4 million for the year, but that's based on trends at period 6 forecasting through to the end of the year. That is an improvement on the period 4 position. So I think the last time we reported to this committee, we were looking at being on budget as a whole for the council. But the underlying trends in that position, whilst there is an improvement to now forecasting an underspend of 4 million, the underlying trends that we're seeing are largely the same as we reported at period 4, really. So there continues to be that mixed picture on social care that you'll see through the report, and children's social care still continuing to be our main area of concern, and still forecasting an overspend in the region of 9 million, which again is similar to period 4. And some of the key factors driving that overspend again are largely unchanged, in that we are seeing our overall numbers of children sort of in care are largely the same, a little bit of fluctuation, but not dramatically. The overspend is largely being driven by an increased number of residential placements and complexity of those placements. And it is those residential placements that cost the council the most. So a lot of effort is going into looking at whether we can step down those placements into sort of less expensive placements. But of course, then there's also some sufficiency issues where we are sort of bound by what's available in the market as well. So children's continues to be kind of the driver of that overspend. Adult social care on quite a different pattern actually is showing a reduction in demand across all areas actually, and again you can see that in the report, and is forecasting an underspend now of 14 million, which is a slight increased underspend compared to the previous position. What I would say though, and you'll see this in a couple of the charts that's in the report, is that there are some signs that the number of service users is starting to tick back up again over the last couple of months, particularly in residential and home care, and that may be now we're sort of starting to go through the winter periods that we might see that increase even further. So I think that's one to watch for the second half of the year really. And then just to point out the high needs deficit position as well. Is that my microphone? Got some, yeah, okay, apologies. Sorry, just moving on to the high needs position, and again, it's similar to the last report actually, that we are looking at an increased deficit on the high needs blocks. We budgeted for a deficit of 17 million, so we budgeted for a deficit at the start of the year, as we have been doing for a number of years. We're forecasting that deficit to increase to about 23 million at the end of the year, which will take the cumulative deficit to about 65 million. So that continues to be a significant concern for the council. Over the MTFS position, period, sorry, that deficit is expected to be in the region of 100 million over the 4 years. So as I think we said before, that in its own, we've got the MTFS gap of in the region of 100 million in terms of the general fund, and then the same again actually on high needs. And I think it's important to remember we've got both of those challenges, and clarity on SEND reform and a solution to the deficit is going to be really key. And as I'll touch on briefly later, the budget last week didn't really give us any clarity on that. In terms of some of the positives, we continue to see inflationary pressures easing, and you'll see that in the report. And the pay award has now been confirmed. So since we brought the last report, we have had some certainty around the pay award. So that does take one uncertainty out for the rest of the year. And interest rates continue to be higher than we thought they would be, and have stayed higher for longer. And we've got an additional £6 million worth of investment income forecast for this year. So the overall impact of all of those changes does mean that whilst we expected to need to use about £6 million of reserves to balance the budget this year, we actually don't need to do that. As if things stay as they are, obviously in the second half of the year things could still change, but we don't expect to need to use those reserves. And that the projected underspend of 4 million and those reserves that we don't need to use this year will all help towards those gaps in future years of the MTFS, which we are undertaking a refresh of the MTFS at the moment, and we'll be bringing that forward to Cabinet in December. But I still expect that 4-year position to be approaching 100 million. So clearly the underspend this year and those reserves are still going to be needed to manage those future pressures. And I think that's the key takeaway really in terms of the revenue budget, that whilst in-year pressures are being managed well, that long-term picture is really challenging, and we need to sort of keep our eye on that and take some positive action on that gap. And then just in terms of capital briefly, we did take a revised capital programme to Cabinet in September, and the report reflects a new programme. So far, we are still largely in line with that updated programme. Just one area to note is an emerging risk on highways maintenance. We are forecasting additional spend of about £3 million on the capital programme this year, and that's additional reactive maintenance that's being needed. And once we've got more clarity on transport funding after last week's budget, we'll have be able to look in detail about how we fund that pressure. We are also seeing some revenue pressures on highways as well, so I think that will be probably a key factor in the next refresh of the MTFS. And then finally, just to sort of point out in terms of the Chancellor's budget announcement last week, we are still working through the implications of the various announcements for Leicestershire. There wasn't as much detail in there as we would have liked probably, so we are awaiting more information over the next few weeks. It may be that we don't have the full information until the settlement, which will be just before Christmas. So I'm not going to kind of go through any of that detail now because we don't actually have it all, but we do have a member training and briefing sessions scheduled for, I think it's the 18th of November, and we will go through it in more detail then, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more information, but as I said, we may not have the full picture until December anyway. I'll leave it there, but obviously have to take questions.
Thank you, Simone. Mr. Galton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, it's very good news that Adult Social Care has made some savings, because that sort of helped keep the overall situation under control. On the subject of messes left by the previous government, the high needs block is probably ranks one of the highest across the country, but obviously particularly focus on Leicestershire. There was something, I did catch something in the budget about this, that there could be some immediate relief, not huge amounts, but I wondered if you knew any more about that. But I understand that there is a commitment to some sort of further look at this, some sort of further review of the high needs block, but I don't think there's any detail yet. But then equally worrying then is the children social care projected 8.9, and the report goes into an incredible amount of detail on this and the reasons for it, and the table is just it tells the story, doesn't it? Residential provision, weekly cost of residential provision is 6,180, 16 plus at 1,666, and we were talking earlier about the market, and clearly there is a market failure here, and there was a program on the radio about it quite recently about people, companies, overseas companies being willing to invest in this area because there's money to be made, which just seems to me to be completely wrong in the context of children's social care. Now, I know we did have some discussions a while ago, not getting back into this like we did many years ago, this provision, but perhaps we would actually own the bricks and mortar. I know we were doing this a bit in adult social care, where we might own the bricks and mortar, we wouldn't run the facility, but there was a mechanism by which we thought we could reduce costs and then have that available. And I am aware that we did actually buy some properties, but equally I'm told they're standing empty and not actually being used. So I just wondered where we are. The market's clearly failing and being far too expensive. So it seemed to me this was an opportunity for us to try and do a bit more ourselves to try and get these costs down. So is there an ongoing strategy looking at that, please?
So just take that last point first, and perhaps in terms of the children's social care and internal provision. There is one of our transformation programs is around creating our own provision. I don't think that completely takes the risk away, because I think then there are issues around recruitment and retention, as well as sort of maintaining standards of those that provision. But there is a transformation programme to create our own provision, and there is a brief update in the report, actually. I think it's paragraph 23 that talks about, I think we've got 2 units currently operational, and then some other units that we are, I think, still doing some work on the buildings, but we're aiming to have those operational by the end of the financial year. So there is a strategy of increasing our own provision to offset some of these market pressures, but I think there's always going to be a mixed approach here. I don't think we'll go back to that situation of having a kind of the balance more of our own provision. I think there'll be a mix with the market as well. And then just in terms of that first question about the SEND funding, there was an announcement of £1 billion of additional funding for SEND in the Chancellor's budget. For 25-26 only, because all of the announcements were just for 1 year. We don't yet know how that's going to be allocated, so that's kind of crucial missing piece of information at the moment, and particularly whether the government will target that funding in any way to address those with the greatest deficits, or whether it will just be a sort of a general formula. And until there is a policy statement that we're expecting from MHCLG towards the end of November, so that might give a little bit more information. But at this point, we don't know how much we'll get of that. The budget did, though, talk about a phase 2 review, both for SEND and also for children's social care as well, actually, that the government understands that there does need to be a more significant reform of both sectors, really. And then in terms of the statutory override for the SEND deficit, which allows us to keep this deficit sort of off our balance sheet, there wasn't any mention of that in the budget. We're anticipating that it will be extended because there isn't any other options really on the table at this point, but we don't have clarity on that yet. That was both points.
Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for the report. As Chair of the Scrutiny Committee for Children and Families, you can imagine this is often discussed as the overspend and the cost. So I'd like to, I'm sure the committee have read this, but paragraphs 21 onwards, and when you see that some of our children, not many fortunately, are costing us £12,000 a week for their care, plus it's very difficult to get people to work in this field. It's a buyer's, it's a provider's market. I hold my hand up. I don't know anybody in my family or friends who do work in this area of looking after very, very complex care of children. We also have the age apart we have to go up to now. They're getting older, they're more expensive. A 16 and 17-year-old can be very difficult to get people to look after. And of course, we do have the 2 million projected overspend in relation to the unaccompanied asylum seekers. I think we're doing the best we can. I take the point that Mr. Galton has raised. Maybe if we owned our own properties, we've still got to get staff. And it is a seller's market, it's not a buyer's market. And if anybody has any ideas, I think we'd like to know, but we also have to look after them for quite a long time. And this is an ongoing problem. I don't think we were given an awful lot of hope by the budget last week. We don't know yet the knock-on effects it will have on the people that provide services to us for children and families. We have no idea yet. It can affect from really quite young children, whether the cost of the raising the national hourly rate, the national insurance contribution, all this has to be passed on. So I think until we get more information, this report, as far as I'm concerned, for children is very, very useful, but I'll be very interested to see where we are in 6 months' time when everything has started to materialize. And I think the overspend we have at the moment, unless we do get government help, I cannot see it being reduced in any short time. And I do thank the team. You can be assured we're looking at it, but it is not a simple solution. Thank you.
Do you want to respond to that, Simone?
I just think and note the comments and agree with some of the challenges that you've outlined there, Mrs. Crowe.
Mr. Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm going to offer Simone and Declan multiple choice because both of my questions are explicitly very, very different. One relates to children and families and one relates to highways. I prefer that we didn't do them at the same time. So it's up to you. Which category would you like to pick in a game show kind of way?
Just do a roadmap.
Yeah. Okay. The first one, without going over the same, I'll grab what Mr. Gould said, Mrs. Fry says. Have we done robust research into the alternatives to the Section 20 care orders? That seems to be where we're hemorrhaging cash. I mean, these commercial residential placements, the figures are absolutely eye-watering. I know it's sensitive and there's a need there, and this may appear, colleagues, as something of a finger in the dike like question, but are we doing all we can to actually head that off? Is there stuff in place? Because we seem to be revisiting that on an annual basis. That's my first one, which is the children and the family. I think that takes priority on this occasion. I do have another question, if that's okay.
I think we might have to come back to you with a little bit more information on that, perhaps outside of the meeting is probably most appropriate.
Okay.
If we come back to you with some more information on that particular query around the Care Act.
Am I on? Yeah. Okay. The next one is a little bit more direct and less sensitive. It's in relation to a project that's very close to home, quite literally for me, and that's the MMDR, the Melton Distributor Road project, which I don't think I can get through a week of my life without having somebody talk to me about it. 2.5 million acceleration due to contractor programming. There's a slight sense in the area that I represent that we're being slightly shanghaied by the project management team on this. The project so far has discovered a dinosaur, an Iron Age fort settlement. I'm reasonably convinced if they dig much deeper, they'll find Lord Lucan and Shergar, and the prices will start increasing. Can we have some assurances that there is sufficient pushback to this organisation? Because as time rattles on, we seem to find more issues that seem to be generating more cash problems. Are we actually taking them to task
I mean, how robust was the contract with them? But this, 2.5 acceleration, what I dread to think what it might be in the new year. Thank you, Chair.
The 2.5 million acceleration noted in the report is not additional spend over and above the budget. What we're saying there is that we are spending that slightly earlier than we planned to, and I think that's because we're trying to make some extra progress given some of the delays that we had with the weather, say earlier in the year, and some of the I think the more work that we can do earlier, the more that we can kind of identify and eliminate the risks that we've got in the project. So I think that 2.5 million is doing some of the work earlier. It's not that we're saying there's an additional cost of 2.5 million. It is funding that was already assumed that we'd spend.
Sorry, Chair. So can I say with some degree of confidence that we've got a fixed price now, that we're not going to invent any more additional on board costs as we go further? This is the price. I appreciate what you say. And also, can I just clarify, are we then referring to the fact that some of this is, if you like, not our error, but our calculations rather than the project management teams?
In terms of the project cost, we still have a long way to go until the project's completed. So I don't think we can. There are a number of assumptions and contingencies in that project budget, and I wouldn't want to say that there wouldn't be any further risk. There are some risks still in the project, but what I would say is that we are having very sort of regular and robust conversations with the contractor to make sure we are eliminating as much risk as possible. But until the project's completed, there will always be risks of further issues. But we do have contingencies in the project budget to offset those. And then there was another point in there, wasn't there? Sorry, I think I might have missed it.
An assurance that there won't be any escalation. I know that, Simone, that's very difficult for you to answer that at this stage.
Yeah, I'd probably just reiterate that point around having those regular and very robust conversations with the contractor.
And Chair, through yourself, this really is the final point I'm going to make on this, because I'm tired of talking about it myself, actually. Is there a possibility, no matter how remote, that the gravity of these financial implications could compromise the project in any way? It's a very big question, but
I think certainly at this point there is no intention or no indications that is going to happen. We have got a revised budget that has needed additional funding. We have got a revised project budget with contingencies in place, and we do intend to see that project through.
But there is pushback to the developers that they stay within scope of agreement.
Yes.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I was so relieved when Councillor Frisbee mentioned dinosaurs. He wasn't talking about me.
You don't know. There's still time.
There's still time. If I was either of the three of you, and I think you've touched on this already, the only bit that would keep me awake at night, if I was that way inclined, is paragraph 13, which is the famous amount that we have to put off balance sheet for the SEND programme. Now, I think you answered the question, which is, my understanding is that the ability to retain it off balance sheet finishes at the end of this financial year unless it's renewed, or is it next year? So my question is, clearly we heard at the LGA conference that Rachel has fixed the foundation. She solved all the problems. Even Ange came and gave us a really upbeat chat. What happens if it's not renewed? There was conversation on this at the LGA conference, is the reason I ask, and the government side were not inclined to even comment on it because they fixed everything. But what do we physically happens to us if the ability to keep it off balance sheet is not renewed?
You basically have to allocate some of your actual reserves to offset the deficit. And interestingly, DfE, I've been around everybody saying exactly that question you've raised, what happens next kind of thing. And they've had quite a lot of authority say to, well, we'll go bust. So they do know the gun is loaded. If they do just sort of let it slip without any action, it's going to just create chaos. But yeah, it is as simple as we've got to find the cash at the moment, but that's just sort of treasury management. But you'd have to actually allocate and say, instead of having a reserve for this purpose, it has now just got to go to clear the deficits, and it is going to put some authorities bankrupt.
Thanks for that. I mean, it was, as I read it and as I understand the budget, but as the deficit increases substantially, with interest rates following the measures in the budget likely to stay higher for longer, the interest charge to us, which we have to absorb as revenue funding in the year, is increasing greatly. At what point does that revenue charge become such a burden that it causes even more problems than it already is?
I mean, to be honest, it's not great at the moment. It's about £2 million per annum. So, and as you say, it's kind of just ramping up each year. And when you combine that with the other costs on SCND around sort of the difficulties getting assessors, which comes from the general fund rather than the high needs block, all the transport costs as well, it is it is up there as one of our top 3 issues as a council. Even though they've done the deferral off balance sheet, we should never lose sight. It is having a big impact on the general fund. And like I say, £2 million at the moment. So on this sort of level, it's going to get up to £4 million, which you could do a lot with. We're having to make saves as an authority at that level to compensate.
Thank you, Mr. King.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report. Very, very interesting, and what you've also said just there, Declan, as well. Even with £2 million, we could do an awful lot with that as a local authority, given some of the savings we've had to make. And one of the ones that keeps coming back to me is the reduction in opening hours at the residential waste sites. That's a particularly thorny subject in my locality in Market Harborough, and also where I live in Kibworth. But the point I wanted to make is, if we look at the table and I'm grateful for the detailed information about some of these overspends. The table in chart in paragraph 21, the top line works out to be 33 million. The second line is 7.2 million. And the third line is 8.02 million in a full year. So cumulatively, that's nigh on £50 million a year of council taxpayers' money on just those 3 items. And correct me if I'm wrong, Simone, when you were responding earlier to Mr. Galton's comments about, well, shouldn't we do some more of this ourselves? And I do understand the reason why we don't currently. But, you know, where something's costing £33 million a year in a full year, that's an awful lot of money. And if we could make a reduction in that £33 million a year expenditure, that doesn't seem to me to be something we oughtn't not to be looking at in a much more active way than I understood you to say. And I am concerned because there are other things that residents would like us to be doing, as I just mentioned. Household waste sites, they'd like us to open more, be open longer, and on every day of the week instead of 3 days a week, which is currently the current thing. And I am concerned that we're perhaps not doing as much as we could do to really sort this out and really deal with this. Except there are challenges; it may not be possible. But I do think there's more we'd be doing. And then just to pick up this high needs point that Mr. Richardson mentioned. So, you know, if that keeps on increasing and we're not making a provision for it at all, and if the government turns around at some point and says, well, we're not giving you any more money than what we have done for it, or we're not going to give you anything at all, then what do we do? And I just wonder if that's perhaps too great a risk, and that we actually ought to be thinking about being a bit more can't think of the word now, but we should be a little bit more moderate in our approach and actually make some allowance or some provision is the word, I think, for the high needs, in the expectation that at some point we're going to have to settle that debt off, and it may be the government won't cover all of that cost. And if that does happen, as I'm aware, as others are, then that would cause us a tremendous problem, along with lots of other authorities. So, but you know, the risk we're running at the moment by not doing anything at all is, you know, it just keeps going up and up and up, and we're not putting anything aside to deal with it. Thank you, Chair.
Just in terms of the first one around the sort of the social care accommodation with children, so there is a program of work. It's not just sort of we're looking at. We are actively sort of creating these houses. The difficulty we have is partly Ofsted capacity and partly kind of recruitment sort of capacity in the market as well. So you, Mr. Galton mentioned there are some of them vacant. Although we do have some occupied. The difficulty is you have to actually finish the home, then get your Ofsted registration, then finish the home, get a manager recruited, then get Ofsted registration, and then the manager can go out and recruit the staff. And that takes an awful lot of time. And during that period of time as well, you're having to sort of pay the staff and the manager before you can then sort of place the children. So it is, by its nature, it is going to be sort of a fairly sort of steady kind of program. We're never going to be able to sort of drop an awful lot of properties in one go in the market. It is going to be very much kind of dictated to how quickly we can sort of staff those homes and making sure the right children are available for those homes as well, that we're not placing the wrong type of children in the type of homes we do. So I can give you some assurance that there is a program working with DfE on it, who are paying, depending on the property, up to 50% of the capital cost as well. So that's all helping to sort of offset these costs without sort of minimising the burden on the Leicestershire Council taxpayer. We are also, there's the other side of this as well. We shouldn't lose sight of, is just try and be better at the commissioning, find different ways of working with the market that we can get some of these figures down, which isn't easy if there's kind of if it's a supply demand. Mr. Fry sort of touched on it about kind of, it's a sort of a seller's market, as it were. So trying to address some of those things, being a bit sharper with our kind of commissioning practices, trying different things to do it. So there is a lot of activity going on there. It's probably one of the main focus areas alongside SEND and adult social care in terms of where we need to try and get the cost down to avoid, like you say, having to make savings elsewhere. In terms of the SEND one, we don't tend to publicise it too much, because DfE used to go around when you got into sort of real serious financial straits and do a deal with you about how much the council was going to pay versus how much DfE were going to pay. So we don't tend to try and sort of write it down too sort of explicitly in place of how much we do provision, but we do provision over 50% of that deficit. So it's just we're a bit sort of careful about kind of what we put it down in case it gets played back against us in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Any more comments, questions on this item? Simone, Declan, Mr. Brecken, did you want to add anything?
No, just say I think it's better being here at Scrutiny that on period 6 with an underspend of 4.1 million than an overspend. That's good news. I think it's at the moment it's prudent management that we are keeping an eye on all our costs and certainly on the demand pressures that we're focusing on still within children. So that will continue. And just to say, Star Chambers begin next week, and obviously we'll be looking at the savings that we've had in this year's, but also looking at future years as well. So, but I think the key will be in the detail of the budget coming through and how that actually impacts and what it gives us in Leicestershire. So we look forward to that. We'll update you as soon as we have that information. So thank you to Declan, thank you to Simone.
And thank you for presenting today and answering everyone's questions. The recommendation is to note and comment on the report. The Commission's comments will be reported to the Cabinet on the 22nd of November. So thank you. It's 12 past. Do you want to take a brief 5-minute break before the next item?
No. Just keep
Carry on. Okay. So item 12 is the final item, is the annual delivery report and performance compendium 2024. Andy Brown, Business Intelligence Team Leader, is introducing the report, supported by Richard Wilding, the Business Intelligence Team Leader, and Zafar is also in attendance. So Andy, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think members will be fairly familiar with the annual reports which we bring to Scrutiny, Cabinet and then to Council each year, based on the last 12 months delivery in 2 parts. The first part is narrative describing progress, achievements, and very much structured around the outcomes in the Council strategic plan, so the 5 priorities and a range of sub-outcomes. And so we've structured the narrative section around that. Based on comments we had last year, we had some positive feedback last year around having this kind of shorter summary, bulleted highlights report. And then actually we've done a shorter summary version as well. So this attached as an appendix is the shorter 9-page summary. So lots of positive progress right across those theme areas this year. We can very much see how services are working corporately through their service plans and activity around those priorities. So lots of sort of smaller services really contributing on environment, economy, and communities and all of those areas. So a lot of that comes through. So a lot of positive work that's gone on. So sort of credit to those people involved in that process, and also some progress on the improvement priorities. Particularly this year, we've seen the progress on the Ofsted inspection through children's social care, moving up to the top rating there. So some good progress on the performance improvement areas as well. So that's all I wanted to say on the narrative side. In terms of the actual kind of hard facts and figures and the performance compendium, we've set out a range of data which really summarises the position looking at 23-24 data that's now available to us. We've got most of the data 23-4 for Leicestershire. We haven't got all the comparative data yet. And we've set out in the report some of the sort of progress that's happened around those indicators, and also the benchmarking position, which Richard, my colleague, will just run you through 2 or 3 slides just highlighting the position on comparative performance. Just before Richard does that, on the fair funding work and core spending power, we've included the chart which sets out the spending position for local authorities, and you can continue to see that Leicestershire is right at the bottom of that core spending power chart still, despite considerable efforts from members of all parties to put Leicestershire's case for a fair funding settlement. So that's still not happened. So we still are very much working under those restraints and pressures. The one benefit from that, we do come out as the most cost-effective county when you divide the outcomes by the spend. So that does come through, and we have included some extra information this year which kind of sets out the analysis around that. But equally, that low level of funding, which is set out in the report for all services, does mean there's an accelerated level of risk moving forward unless those settlements are better. So we have set out in the report some of those risks and improvement areas. So Richard, if you want to just run through those headline slides.
Thanks, Andy. So this first slide, I've got a very few slides which summarise really some of the main points from the performance compendium in the agenda pack. So this one summarises spending and performance for the 32 counties that we typically compare ourselves with. It's based on 2022-23, for which we've got a full set of benchmarking information. Across the horizontal axis, it shows net spend per head, with the lower spending authorities to the right-hand side. And then the vertical axis shows rank of performance, with higher performance towards the top and lower relative performance to the bottom. So the top right quadrant represents low spend and high performance. So that's really where you want to find yourself. Leicestershire's ranked 6th of this group of counties for overall performance. It's 1 place lower than it was the previous year. We've historically been the lowest spender per head of the counties, and that continues to be the case in this chart. The next view, and this chart takes a very similar approach, but it brings in the different theme or service areas, and this brings together quite a number of scatter charts that are included in the agenda pack. So again, this shows relative performance and relative spend for these different theme areas. Again, the top right quadrant shows low spend and high performance. All of our services are below average spend per head, so they're all on the right-hand side of the centre point. Probably worth noting the contrast here between performance rank for adult social care delivery, which is right near the top of the chart there, and the rank for the perception quality of life measures. So that we've historically had quite a gap between performance in those 2 areas. I think in many ways the quality of life satisfaction areas, there's not a large statistical difference often between the spread of results from different authorities. Nonetheless, it is a sort of improvement area for us. The next slide shows the performance quartile positions from the various dashboards that are in the pack that you've got. It shows the last 4 years with the most recent years in dark purple, and it shows the percentage of indicators in each of these quartiles. So first quartile is performance in the top 25% of comparator authorities.
bottom quartile is the bottom 25%. Some of these are based on published end of year data for 2023-24, but quite a number are from the previous year because the government hasn't yet published the full set of data for all local authorities. I mean, results here really suggest a bit of natural variation from year to year. We've got a slightly lower percentage in the top quartile than we had last year. Some service areas continuing to face sort of significant pressures, which we've heard from in relation to the budget a moment ago. Also some ongoing pressures and impact following from the pandemic. Having said that, the results that we've got for the most recent year do look fairly positive in terms of progress. And this brings me on to the last but one slide, and this one shows change or direction of travel in the performance indicators that are in the pack that you've got. So this is really whether there's been an improvement or a decline compared to the previous result. It also shows the last 4 years, with the most recent years in darker blue. Worth noting really that many of these indicators, they do cover outcomes. Some of these have a good degree of control that we can exert over them. So an example might be sort of reablement indicators in adult social care. But there are some others where we've got a lot less control. So things like life expectancy or unemployment. So they're bigger issues really than the council has direct control over. We've seen, you'll note, 53% that are improving on the left-hand side. That's quite a bit of a larger percentage improving than we've had in previous years. It's quite a complicated picture to explain. I mean, I mentioned the legacy of the pandemic. Some areas that we've done particularly well on, I think, over the last year and seen improvement in the sort of clean green area, the great communities area, sort of usage of libraries, heritage sites. I think a bit of a bounce back still going on there from the pandemic. Also the corporate enablers, the final dashboard in the agenda pack, we've got quite a lot of indicators there that are improving. We'll have an idea on the benchmark, the overall benchmark position early in the new year. We're slightly optimistic we might have moved back up a place or two, but we're waiting to sort of crunch those numbers finally. So I'll just hand back to Andy just to pick up a few sort of areas of focus for the year ahead.
Yeah, just some final points to draw the committee's attention to. We've set out in paragraph 13 the lower performing areas in 22-23 and sort of comments on progress this year. It does look like there has been some positive progress in those lower performing areas, particularly some of the satisfaction surveys around adult social care have looked like some improvement in those recently, as well as some of the other areas services have been focusing on, but still some issues within those as well. And equally in paragraph 15, we've really sought to pull out those areas where there's been some progress, but also those areas where there's still issues in performance terms and where services are under pressure. And there are quite a range of reports going to come through to yourself and to Cabinet over the next few months that touch on some of those issues. I think there's more around the environment, biodiversity. There's the new adult social care strategy, which I think is due to come forward shortly. Director of Public Health's annual report will be looking at health in a bit more detail. So you will start to see some of those issues come through to you. We've set out some of the CCN views on priority areas for the new government in terms of reform, and you've already mentioned special educational needs and children's services as being two of the areas where fundamental reform is being sort of suggested by CCN, and also adult social care, perhaps not mentioned as much, the need for reform around that area, which covers some of those priority areas for the council in terms of its performance and progress. And as I mentioned, section 20 sets out the service risks facing the council. And so there is a need for continued focus in quite a range of areas, and these reports do feed into service planning in departments. And there will also be a refresh of the outcomes framework next year, looking to take account of some of the changes in the environment, the new government's agenda and priorities for the council moving forwards.
For the detailed report and the presentation, does any members have any questions or comments for Mr. Richardson?
Just a comment, if I may, Chairman, as in my role as Chairman of Adults Community Scrutiny. You mentioned the hoary old chestnut that ever since I become Chairman we looked at is satisfaction levels. But I think just to put in perspective for members of this committee, And one of the reasons is that other councils, significantly better funded than ours, offer a service where they sort of ring up people every 1 or 2 months to check they're happy. Now, we just don't have the resource to do that. So, of course, when it comes to a survey, quite naturally, we're at a disadvantage. A huge amount of work has been done by the team on a cost-effective basis, and it is improving. But without that core funding differential being eroded, we're never going to get to the level of other councils. And I just take comfort from the fact that the quality of service we provide is up there in that top right-hand quadrant. And it may be we're in the bottom right-hand quadrant for satisfaction, but in some ways, that's the place I'd rather be. But we could do so much more with just a little bit more of funding.
Mr. Richardson, any other comments, questions? You want to come back on anything Mr. Richardson said?
Just to say on adult social care, we are due a CQC inspection, is my understanding, within the next few months. We've already submitted some information to CQC in terms of a self-assessment, and you're quite right, it does point to a lot of the positive work that has gone on through the county council around adult social care, lots of positive delivery working with the NHS. So once we get that inspection result, that will hopefully point to any, obviously the positives that have been done and any improvement issues that the council might want to pick up on moving forwards. So I think that'll be helpful once we've had that process.
Mrs. Page.
Yes, because I've got no question doesn't mean I don't appreciate the report. You know I do. I think it's a brilliant piece of work, and to repeat myself like a stuck record, it is my Bible to go back on. But I've just noticed as I was flicking through that it referred to deprivation, and I was just wondering on the back of Councillor Richardson's comment as well, do we keep a detailed index of deprivation, i.e. where we're also looking at hidden deprivation, because we've got quite a lot of that. And if the government will look at funding in future to look at deprivation, if we haven't got the evidence, we're going to be part of the low funded or even more low funded. So I just want you to talk me a little bit around deprivation and our evidence. And with that, no further questions, and thanks again, and send me an email link.
Yeah, just on the deprivation, all local authorities use figures that the government produce called the Index of Multiple Deprivation. So we've got that data. It dates back to 2019. It's due to be refreshed, I think, in the next year. So we should have a more up-to-date set of data. That it's fair to say it doesn't rank the county as particularly deprived overall, but that data does go right down to neighbourhood level, and it does allow us to identify where there are significant pockets of deprivation, particularly in some of the urban centres. It also provides us with data across about 8 or 9 different sub-themes. So you can look at whether there are issues of deprivation related to housing or to education or to employment, as well as that overall figure. So we do have that, and it is available. We've got a Tableau dashboard that makes it available to managers and staff across the authority. And I know it's something that we regularly are asked about in terms of service planning and prioritisation. So very much so, yes.
And as you say, it goes right back into sort of grassroots, so nothing can sort of escape. So we have got a real serious or proper reflection, because one of the things is I find in my area, I've got also an awful lot of pensioners and, as we said earlier, farmers who seem to be asset rich, but very much capital poor. So does that reflect, is there a reflection to that as well? Or, what are the indicators? So, and thank you very much.
Yeah, no, there is a lot of detail in there. Around things like age and incomes. So yeah, no, it's quite a broad-based definition. But I probably won't give members a full detail about it now, but I'm happy to share the details.
Does any other member have any questions, comments on this item? No? Okay, well, thank you today for presenting and for producing The reports, the recommendation is to note the report which is to be presented to the Cabinet and thereafter full Council. The Commission's comments will be reported to those meetings. Item 13 is the date of the next meeting. The next meeting of the Scrutiny Commission is scheduled to take place on Monday the 27th of January 2024 at 10 a.m. As stated at the start of the meeting, I have no urgent items. I therefore thank everyone for attending today and for their contributions and declare the meeting closed. Thank you.